Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Halloween show. This evening's entertainment begins with many selections from the Gogol Suite by Alfred Schnittley, arranged by Gutjahr. The second set will be made up of arrangements, also done by Alex, to the music of Danny Elfman from the animated classic The Nightmare Before Christmas. For this part, I will be reading some prose that was written especially for the occasion, entirely inspired by listening to these pieces. The musicians for the evening are Krystal Morrison on clarinet, Averil Parker on alto sax and clarinets, Kim Desjardins on tenor sax, clarinet and flutes, Melissa Pipe on bassoon and bari sax, Jimmy Rhodes on trumpet, Meiling Fong on violin, Stephanie Vermette on violin, Amber Jackson on viola, Nicole MacDonald on cello, Shaun on double and electric bass, Chantale Morin on keyboards, Andrew Appleby on percussion, and Erica Bridgman also on percussion. There will be 4 vocalists for the nightmare stuff, which we will announce at a later date. Tonight's story centers around an almost perfectly normal little girl living in an almost perfectly normal little town. You may, after a while, recognize the town or the girl, or both. The spiders showed up without much attention being drawn to them, or perhaps they had always been there. Perhaps they were the ones who noticed the townsfolk start to build on and live on the outskirts of town in question. But at one point, and no one can really remember when, the town children started to notice these spiders. They wove such fascinating webs, like none the little bored children had ever seen or ever could have imagined. The webs, with their crisscrosses, whirls, whorls, spirals, and perhaps even ciphers worked into their delicate designs, intoxicated the children. Literally. The children would sit, dumbfounded and awestruck, looking at the finished products of the spiders' demented industry. Some of the more inquisitive youth would try to catch the spiders at work, not quite content to simply see the product, but also interested in the process. It was then that they realized that the spiders could communicate telepathically. It was then that the children realized that in order for the spiders to keep creating their horribly magnificent masterpieces, there was a price to be paid. A cover charge, as it were, a price of admission, much like you've all paid this evening. Unfortunately, money is quite useless to an arachnid, and so the price the children paid was quite a bit more unsettling than a piece of paper with a historical figure on it. Day after day, the children brought their unholy toll to the spiders, and the 8-legged pushers in return spun their stupefying webs. Webs of all shapes and sizes, webs of all colors and feelings. The children at times would feel upon gazing at the fragile lunatic asymmetry that they were in it. They were balancing on the webs, they were defying the laws of gravity and performing illogical trapeze acts, and were always safe, never falling. Always safe. Well, that's how they felt anyway. There's an old myth about first locks of hair and baby teeth. Some parents hold on to these things out of nostalgia, but the tradition started out of safety. You see, there's an awful lot of mojo when a child's first tooth or virgin curl shorn from their temples. With either of these items, if you know enough about the old ways, you can control the person from whom these items were taken. And the spiders, being from an ancient clan with a long communal history, knew the old ways well. And the endless parade of baby tooth-bearing children continued into the spider's lair. Naive and absolutely innocent, these children placed no value on old parts of them that had naturally and rather painlessly been removed. And anyway, it was worth a yellow-brown, bicuspid, or blonde curl tied up with a bow to see the kaleidoscopic web displays created by the ever-growing population of spiders. And the extent to which the children were drawn to and submerged into the spider's evil art continued to grow. Children went missing for days at a time, happy to stay and imagine themselves as part of this bizarre art being spun daily. And the more they enjoyed the art, the more their intimate pieces they brought into the control of the spiders, and the more the control the spiders had over them, until the children had in effect run away to join the circus. But it wasn't a circus with elephants or clowns, which I'm sure we can all agree is scary enough to begin with. It was the circus of the Order of Arachnid, eons old and more sinister than you can imagine. And what exactly did the spiders want with the children? I mean, besides their baby teeth and undivided attention, in a word, allegiance. With the baby teeth and early curls, the spiders had enough mojo to control the kids, and with the children under control, the spiders had an excellent advantage over the adults that at one point would surely come, as the children were hardly returning home these days. And the adults came, full of rage and insecticide and indignation. With a foot-powered pump, they saturated the spider's lair with a chemical that was supposed to kill spiders, but not children. Pump, 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 pump. They filled the lair up with this brand of insecticide, guaranteeing to be safe to humans. Gallons of the iridescent verdigris rushed into the lair of the spider clan, coating the walls, coating the webs, and it rose all the way up to the top roof. And the adults pumped more and more and more, hoping for their children to float up to the top, alive, treading in this puddle of death. There seemed to be no end to the supply of this noxious lake. They just kept drowning all of the perceived evil in that lair, convinced that their offspring would not be affected and would float up safe and sound, and that tomorrow would just be another day. And that is where the surprise came. The surprise to them, of course, is that the children didn't float up. The spiders and their webs had over the kids, they chose to stay and drown. And so the poison killed the spiders, but drowning killed the children. all of the children but one, that is. A little girl who went by the name of Adelaide. And of course, Adelaide's family moved after the entire debacle of the insecticide assault. What would you do if you were the parents of the sole surviving child among hundreds of dead ones? Yeah, you'd move too. Especially if you had been the one that provided the insecticide to the parents of the town at a discount. Yeah, you'd move. It was November, and Adelaide was spending a weekend with her folks at her maternal grandparents' place. It wasn't much fun for a young girl, and that's why she decided to explore. Funny thing about Adelaide. Despite surviving a toxic apocalypse where all of her friends and peers perished, she was still curious and a little bit on the adventurous side. The first snow of the season and the unreasonable chill outside kept the young child indoors and therefore limited the space she had to explore. It is of no surprise, then, that she came across the attic with her mother's porcelain doll collection. There were dolls of all kinds there. And though it struck her as wrong somehow, poor Adelaide was so starved for friendship and attention from someone or something that wasn't an adult that she didn't mind that much when the dolls started talking to her. Yes, that's right. The dolls started talking to her. And it didn't bother her when Nesbitt, the soldier-style grenadier general doll who is incidentally missing an eye, asked her to dance. Despite the lack of depth perception that he had due to his one and only eye, Nesbitt was a rather good dancer. And everything was going okay until he decided to share a story with her. Whether or not this story is true is hardly the point. It wriggled its way into Adelaide's brain and stayed put like some sort of brain parasite. There are some things that once you see or hear them cannot be unseen or unheard. And Nesbitt's story was a perfect example of this. Here's his story. "My eye is missing," he said. "Surely you've noticed that. Do you want to know where it went, or rather where it is now?" Nesbitt took Adelaide's terrified lack of response as a fascinated yes, and so he continued. "There were these spiders." Adelaide tried to repress a shudder. "They wove webs the likes of which an innocent young girl like yourself has never seen, I'm sure. There was a price to pay, of course, as there always is in life. It started off with strands of hair, baby teeth. I couldn't understand what they wanted with these things, and I didn't much care either. And because Nesbitt was so engrossed in his own story, and of course leading the dance, he was unable to see how uncomfortable he was making his partner. One day, with no baby teeth left and no intention of giving up the habit of web viewing, they asked for an awfully dear price. At that, Adelaide could take no more. She yelped and ran for the door to find the safety and comfort of adults. Down from the attic she ran, taking the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time. As bored as she was with the adults at the beginning, this is how much she wanted to regain their peaceful and boring company down in the living room now. Why Adelaide was running, she couldn't tell you if you asked. She simply felt compelled to flee. It seemed to her that the staircase was 10 times as long on the way down as it had been when she first climbed it. And yet, she didn't tire. She just absolutely had to be away from the attic and closer to the adults. Perhaps it was the fact that she finally realized she was talking to a porcelain doll. Perhaps it was the mention of those unholy, 8-legged nightmares from her past. It might even have been the memory of how exactly it was that she survived the terrible toxic drowning that snuffed out the lives of her and her friends and her peers. Yeah, maybe that's what was bothering her. Yes, that was it, wasn't it? She was running away from the story of how she, and she alone, among a dozen children her age, managed to escape safe and sound. And so she ran, away from the dolls, away from the dancing, but she could not escape her memory. I bet you'd like to know how she got out, wouldn't you? All right, then. Well, it worked out like this. On the day of the toxic flood, Adelaide had been watching a spider spin its web. Yes, she was one of those precocious little ones that enjoyed watching the art in progress rather than waiting and enjoying a finished piece. As a matter of fact, she went even so far as to make a suggestion to the working spider as to how it should finish its design. The spider stared at her with consternation in its many ocelli, and Adelaide was surprised to see that such emotion could be conveyed in such inhuman eyes. All 8 of them. The design the spider had been working on looked like an old-fashioned padlock with knotwork embroidered into it, and Adelaide thought that the padlock should be open. But the spider who was making the design wanted it to be fastened. She mentioned her preference to the spider, and the spider ignored her and kept on working. She mentioned it again, and the spider stopped, turned, and tried to stare her down and make her submit to its will. It couldn't understand why the usual trick was not working. Hadn't she, like all of the others, paid with pieces of her person? Wouldn't she therefore also be under the influence of the Spider Clan? And therein lies the secret to Adelaide's survival. Time that the others had been paying with real hair and real baby teeth, Adelaide had been bringing in doll hair of the same color of hers, and these little pieces of yellowed chalk that she had collected from the schoolroom floor. The spiders, being so overwhelmed with the amount of goods they were collecting on a daily basis from the children, had been fooled by Adelaide, who had not forged her payment out of any desire for self-preservation, but just out of laziness. It was easier to chop off the hair of dolls long since abandoned for newer ones, or to surreptitiously scoop up chalk bits from a classroom, than to ask her parents where their personal mementos were kept. Besides, she had a sneaking suspicion that her folks, unlike the parents of her peers, didn't really keep such personal, valuable objects, which made her sad. The spider, now rather upset that Adelaide was not only making suggestions, but also not subject to its will, decided to flee and tell the other spiders, but Adelaide blocked its path. As it tried to maneuver around her, they did a weird and awkward kind of dance. Neither one wanting to get too close, but neither one willing to back down either. Side to side, they swayed, while up above, the adults were congregating. And all of the spiders and children down below were completely oblivious. They circled and circled, and were it not for the pained and frightened look on Adelaide's face, and the menacing, hissing, and clicking sounds coming from the spider, one might have thought, from a distance, that they were doing some weird sort of tango. Finally, the spider slipped between Adelaide's legs and ran like mad for the other spiders, as fast as its 8 little legs would carry it. It scurried towards the clan, with Adelaide in a furious chase behind it. Through corridors they ran, all the corridors lined with webs. They passed stunned children gazing at the finished webs, mouths slightly open. The race went on and on. Would come to naught as the spider in pursuit ran into a disgusting flood of toxic goop. The goop poisoned all of the spiders on contact, but Adelaide could not understand why the other children were not swimming to safety as she was, but instead tying themselves into the webs in the cave to stay and drown with their 8-legged masters. Upon regaining safe adult company in the living room with her parents and her mom's parents, Adelaide looked behind her to see if there were any porcelain dolls in pursuit. There were none. She tried to decide whether or not to tell her parents and her grandparents about Nesbit and the rest of the talking and moving dolls, but she decided against it. She couldn't put it into words, and so obviously neither can I. Why, she decided that some things were just not meant for adults to hear. Adelaide had often been told that there were things she would understand when she was just a little bit older. Adelaide decided that this was the type of thing that the adults were just too old to understand. They would tell her it was just her imagination, just like when she told the absolute truth about what happened with the spiders. So she smiled politely as she wiped the sweat from her brow and answered that she was doing just fine. And when her grandmother offered her a cookie, she said she would love one. And no, the cookie would not spoil her dinner. And she discovered at that very moment that she bit into the cookie that she was getting quite good at acting normal for an adult crowd, despite the fact that she felt like she was teetering over the brink of insanity from time to time. Oh well. As long as the grown-ups didn't bother too much over her, she'd keep her little secrets. And there you have it, ladies and gents. The story of Adelaide, an almost perfectly normal little girl. She has a few other interesting stories to tell if you ask her and listen carefully, and you can decide whether her stories are true or not. If you ever meet her, perhaps you can ask her about the little boy that she taught to dance. It's a good story. Just whatever you do, don't mention spiders. She's still not quite over that one yet.